There is a chamber in the New York woods where the sun only enters one morning a year. On the winter solstice, at first light, a blade of gold slides down a stone tunnel nobody will claim to have built. Farmers, they said. Root cellars. Case closed. Except the man who ran the State Museum admitted, on the record, that these places were never really studied. Nobody looked. Nobody wanted to. 350 ancient sites sit inside these mountains. A handful have ever been dug. The rest just wait. And the deeper you go, the worse the questions get. Stones that shouldn't balance. A lake that swallows people. Skeletons the newspapers swore were giants. 13 sites. Real places. On real maps. And at every one, the experts went quiet. We start where the light comes in. Number 13. The Kent Cliffs Chamber, Putnam County, New York. A low doorway in a hillside. Slabs of granite laid without a drop of mortar, corbelled inward until they meet overhead like a stone throat. You have to stoop to enter. Inside, it is cold in a way the season can't explain. The entrance faces one point on the horizon, the winter solstice sunrise. On the shortest day of the year, the light reaches all the way to the back wall. The official story is root cellar, a place to keep potatoes, but a root cellar sits by the house. This one sits alone in the woods, oriented to the sky, dragged from stone that weighs tons. And here is the detail that eats at the root cellar story from the inside. These chambers were built with no door, no frame, no hinges, no way to seal them against the frost. The doors and the mortar you sometimes find were added later by people who came along afterward and simply used what was already standing. A cellar you cannot close keeps nothing cold. Whatever this was built for, it was never meant to be shut. Researchers who measured it found the alignment too precise for an accident. Historians who never measured it called them cranks. And in 2001, the man who had been chief archaeologist for the New York State Museum said the quiet part out loud. The chambers, he admitted, had never been seriously studied. Nobody had produced any evidence at all. Not evidence against, just nobody looking. Locals who grew up nearby say their cameras die at the threshold. It is said one visitor's phone quit the instant she crossed under the stone, then came back to life the moment she stepped out the far side. Maybe nerves, maybe cold on a lens, maybe the reason no one wants to spend the night inside. Number 12, the Putnam Valley Chambers, near Oscawana Lake. Not one chamber, dozens. A whole hillside of them, some paired, twin doorways in the earth a few feet apart. One double chamber here is so rare that a county legislator once tried to pass a law just to protect it. He failed. His colleagues didn't believe it mattered. The people who study these call the density impossible for colonial farmers. Why would settlers, carving a homestead out of raw forest, spend seasons hauling megalithic stone to build cellars they'd never need, aligned to a sky they didn't worship? In 1654, a man named John Pynchon wrote a letter mentioning a stone wall and a strong chamber, all made of stone, newly discovered near the Pequot country. Already old, already unexplained, before most of the colonists even arrived. There is a beat here worth sitting with. No artifacts. In all these chambers, almost nothing has ever been found inside. No pottery, no bones, no tools. Swept clean or never lived in at all. A building with no trace of the builder is not a home. And then there is the one thing that was supposedly found, the thing that makes this worse instead of better. The story goes that in the 90s, an 8-inch blade of obsidian was pulled from the wall of one of these chambers. It was said to be lab tested at roughly 2,000 years old. Obsidian, volcanic glass. There is no obsidian in this part of New York. The obsidian, the account claims, traced back to Iceland. An Icelandic blade 2,000 years old, in the wall of a chamber outside New York City. It should have rewritten everything. Instead, they say, it was sent off for further testing, and it vanished. Gone before anyone could confirm it. The one piece of hard evidence lost in transit exactly when it mattered most. Believe as much of that as you like, but it fits the pattern too neatly. These chambers give up their secrets right up until the moment the secret could be proven. Then the door closes. Number 11. Balanced Rock, North Salem. A single boulder of pink granite, 60 tons by the marker, closer to 90 by other counts. It does not sit on the ground. It rests on 5 slender legs of limestone, standing on their points like fingertips, holding the weight above the earth. Geologists have a word for it: erratic. A rock dropped by a melting glacier 10,000 years ago that happened, by pure chance, to land balanced on smaller stones, happened to land on 5 uprights of a different rock than itself, arranged like the legs of a table. Back in 1824, a professor of mineralogy looked at it and wrote that it was no accident at all. He called it a dolmen, a Celtic burial monument, a tomb raised by hands. 2 centuries later, the argument has never ended. The geologists say ice. The others say the proportions are wrong for ice, that no stone nearby matches the legs, that chance does not build furniture. Passionate arguments, both sides, no resolution, just a 90-ton stone standing on its toes in a field by the road, waiting for someone to admit they don't actually know. There was a twin to this once, across the river near Nyack, another great balanced stone on a high hill. But in the 1960s, someone grew afraid it might tip, roll down, and crush the cars below. So they jackhammered it out of existence. One of these stones, destroyed on purpose because no one could say for certain what it was or how long it had stood. The other survives only because it happens to sit in a field where it threatens nothing. That is how thin the thread is. The evidence lasts exactly as long as it stays out of the way. People who visit the North Salem stone at the solstice claim their compasses won't agree near it. 2 needles side by side, pointing different ways. Number 10, Chimney Point, the narrows of Lake Champlain. Where the lake pinches thin enough to cross, there is a spit of land that has pulled people to it for 9,000 years. 9,000. Longer than the pyramids, longer than writing. Dig here and the spear points come up in layers, one age beneath another, all the way down. The oldest are fragments so early archaeologists could barely name them. Below the bow, below the wheel, before the memory of anyone who came after. This is the honest anchor of the whole list. Not folklore, documented, dated, undeniable. People stood on this exact ground when the ice had only just let go of these mountains. And that raises the question that haunts everything north of here. For 100 years, the maps left the interior of these mountains blank. Writers called it a dismal wilderness, a place no one had ever lived, the habitation of winter. One old map simply labeled the whole heart of the range, deer hunting country, as if nothing else had ever happened there. They were wrong. The ground proves they were wrong, and the proof travels farther than anyone expected. At sites along this corridor, they have found stone that does not belong here at all. Toolstone traced hundreds of miles to its source. Rock carried across enormous distance, hand to hand, long before roads, long before the wheel. These were not isolated people huddled in a frozen corner of the world. They were connected, moving, trading across a continent. On ground, the history books swore was empty. So what else did they decide was nothing, simply because they never walked in to check? Number 9. Split Rock, Essex, on the Champlain shore. A shelf of stone breaks off the shoreline here, and in the right light, the formations look like something that was alive, coiled, scaled, petrified mid-motion. The old people of this water had a name for what the stone remembers. The Abenaki called it Gitaskog, a horned serpent, a thing that lived in the deep and was not to be disturbed. Early in the 1700s, the Abenaki warned French explorers plainly, "Do not trouble the water. Do not wake what sleeps beneath it." The French wrote it down and sailed on. It is said the serpent still keeps to the narrows near here, where the lake goes dark and cold and drops away beneath the boats, and it does drop. Off this shore, the bottom falls out fast, down into some of the deepest, blackest water in the whole lake. There is a reason the horned serpent belongs to this exact stretch and not another. The people who lived here for 10,000 years chose this place for the story. They knew the water. They knew what the shape in the rock was pointing at. The rock that looks like a snake. The tradition older than the state. The warning that came with the territory. You can stand on Split Rock today and see the shapes for yourself. Whether they are stone or something stone was pressed around long ago, the old-timers would only tell you this: the lake keeps its own counsel, and it does not give things back. Number 8. The Duchess Quarry Caves, Orange County, a cave mouth in a limestone ridge. Inside, in the cold dark, they found a spear point of a kind used to hunt the great animals that are gone now, and beside it, bone. Caribou bone, radiocarbon dated to more than 12,000 years ago. Caribou, this far south in New York. The point and the bone together mean a hunter stood in this cave at the edge of the Ice Age, in a world of tundra and animals that no longer exist, when the glaciers were still grinding north not far away. That much is documented. That much is real. What isn't settled is everything else. Who they were, where they came from, how they reached a cave in the dark of a ridge that, by every older textbook, should have been buried under ice or empty of people entirely. The dispute over what this cave means has run for decades and never closed. Some of the dates put people here so early, they brush against the very edge of when the ice is supposed to have released this land at all. Push a little harder and you cross into a timeline the textbooks are not ready to allow. That is why the argument never ends. It is not really about the bone. It is about what the bone would force everyone to admit. A hunter, a lost animal, a frozen world, 12,000 years down in the rock. And the experts still fight about the one date that would change everything. Number 7. The Cumberland Bay Pot, Lake Champlain. From the bottom of the bay, they pulled up a clay pot. Whole, unbroken. That alone is wrong. Ancient pottery almost never survives intact. Time crushes it. The ground breaks it. What archaeologists usually find are shards. 100 pieces of a thing to be puzzled back together over years. This one came up complete. Pre-contact, made and shaped and fired long before any European saw this water, and then somehow lowered into the lake and left, perfect, for centuries. A pot doesn't sink itself gently to the floor of a bay and wait to be found unharmed. Someone put it there. Filled, maybe. Sealed, maybe. An offering to the water in a place where the people already spoke of a serpent in the deep. Or dropped in panic. We don't know. The record is thin and the shore is quiet about it. Think about what it takes for a clay pot to survive whole for 2,000 years. It has to avoid every rock, every current, every winter of ice grinding the shallows, every net and anchor and careless oar. The odds against it are almost past counting, and yet it waited on the floor of the bay, intact, as if something had set it down carefully and meant for it to stay. In a lake whose oldest stories are full of a serpent and a warning not to disturb the water, a perfect vessel resting on the bottom starts to look less like an accident and more like an offering, recovered, catalogued, and never fully explained. One more thing pulled out of Champlain that the record has no comfortable place to put. Number 6. Calendar Chamber, the Woodstock Line. East of the Champlain Valley, where these hills roll into stone chamber country, sits the largest of them all. The roof slabs are the biggest in the whole northeast, 15 feet across, over a foot thick, several tons each, laid overhead by someone. They named it for what it does. On the winter solstice, the rising sun aims straight through the doorway and fills the chamber with light. A calendar built of stone, a machine for catching one exact moment in the turning of the year. Its inner dimensions, some have pointed out, echo the same proportions found in far older chambers across the ocean. Passage tombs in Ireland that do the very same thing on the very same morning, 5,000 years ago. When the solstice sun reaches down the passage at Newgrange in Ireland, it lights a chamber built before the pyramids, and here, in the hills west of Champlain, another doorway waits for the same sun on the same day. Some have gone further and measured the inner room against the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, and found the same ratio, staring back. Whether that means anything or nothing, no one has been allowed to properly test. Coincidence, say the careful voices. Root cellar again. But a root cellar does not aim itself at the sun. And this is where the real question of the whole list opens all the way up. If one chamber is aligned by chance, fine. But there are dozens, across 3 states, all quiet, all cold, all facing the same light on the same shortest day. A whole network pointed at the sky, by people the history books insist were never here. Number 5. The perched boulders, ridgelines of the highlands. All through these hills, if you climb high enough, you find them. Great stones balanced on smaller ones, set on high ground, facing out. Tripod rocks, some call them. A boulder resting on 3 uprights, like the balanced rock but repeated again and again along the tops of the ridges. Many of them, it's said, line up with the summer solstice, the longest day marked by a stone a dozen men couldn't lift. Glacial erratics, comes the answer. Ice did it, chance did it, maybe. But here is the part that gets me. One of these balanced stones was surveyed, documented, its solstice alignment written down. And 1 year after the survey was finished, the land was sold and the boulder was moved with heavy machinery. Gone, erased. Whatever it was, whatever it might have proven, no one can measure it now. And that is the quiet horror running under all of this. The sites vanish faster than anyone studies them. The evidence disappears while the experts look away. Old-timers on these ridges tell it simply. The stones were here before us, and we are very good at losing them. Number 4. The rock shelters of the interior. Cedar River, the Shroon country. Deep in the mountains, tucked under overhangs of rock, there are shelters where people sheltered for thousands of years. The old accounts describe finding pots left behind in them, tucked into a cleft, the way you might leave a coffee pot at a camp for whoever comes next week. One came out of a shelter on the Cedar River whole and ancient, and then, the account says, it was broken, smashed by lumberjacks who found it a curiosity. That is how most of this history has ended, not studied, not preserved, broken by whoever stumbled in first. An old article from the 1940s describes ground slate knives and buried arrows found beside deserted fireplaces on a trail that ran up from the Hudson, through the passes, to Champlain. A road through the mountains, used for so long the fires had gone cold centuries before anyone wrote it down. The people who left these things are gone. The things themselves are mostly gone too, carried off, broken up, lost. And this is the quiet tragedy that experts who did care have admitted out loud. Precious knowledge of what happened in these mountains is being lost forever, dug out and scattered by hobbyists and treasure hunters before a single professional ever records it. The history isn't being studied, it's being looted. Pot by pot, fireplace by fireplace, the answer disappears. What's left is the shape of a presence. Fireplaces with no one around them, shelters with the warmth long out of them, a trail worn through the high passes for so many centuries that the fires beside it had gone cold before anyone thought to write the trail down. And the sense, when you stand inside one, that you are very much not the first, and that the ones before you left in a hurry. Number 3. Bulwaga Bay, Port Henry, on the Adirondack coast. The lake here is deep and it is old, and it has a resident. The people who lived on these shores first, the Abenaki and the Iroquois, told of a great horned serpent in the water long before any European wrote a word. It has a name in their tongue. It was not a story for children, it was a warning. Then, in July of 1819, a newspaper in Plattsburgh printed an account. A Captain Crum on the water at Bulwaga Bay described a black monster near 200 feet long, a head like a seahorse, eyes the color of a peeled onion, a belt of red around its neck reared up out of the lake. Since then, the sightings number in the hundreds. Railroad crews, steamboat passengers, a county sheriff who swore he was close enough to see inside its mouth. The scientists have their answers. A sturgeon, a floating log, a trick of cold air bending light across the water into something long and alive. Probably, almost certainly, except for one recording. In 2003, a research team lowered instruments into the lake and captured sounds down in the dark water. The sounds resembled echolocation, the clicking sonar of a beluga whale or a dolphin. And there are no belugas in Lake Champlain. There are no dolphins. Nothing that lives in that lake is supposed to be able to make that sound at all. Something down there was pinging the dark, and no one can say what it was. Bulwaga Bay is where the modern sightings began, and the town on its shore still keeps a board that counts them. And the old people said it first, and said it plainly. Something is in the lake. Do not wake it. Number 2. The Champlain Valley Graves, along the old shore. This is the one the history books do not want printed, so we print it the way it comes down to us, as report, as claim, as something the old newspapers swore was true. Through the 1800s, accounts came out of this valley of skeletons dug from the ground that were wrong. Too large. Abnormal, the report said. Bones of people who, if the measurements were honest, would have stood far taller than any man. The stories cluster along the same shore where the ancient spear points come up, the same crossings, the same old ground. Now, newspapers of that age exaggerated. Bones get misjudged, mismeasured, lost before any expert sees them. Almost every one of these accounts has a plain explanation, and the extraordinary ones have no bones left to test. That is the honest truth of it, and we say it plainly. But here is what makes the back of the neck cold. The reports were never really investigated either. They went the way of the chambers and the perched stones and the broken pots. Written down once in a local paper, then dropped, then quiet. It is the same shape every time on this list. A thing is found, a thing is reported. And then the people whose job it is to know decide it is better not to look. Suppressed history believers have a word for that vein of silence. They call it a pattern. The careful call it coincidence. You have 13 coincidences in front of you now. You can decide how many a place is allowed before it stops being chance. Whatever came out of that ground, it was reburied in silence, and the valley, as always, kept it. Number 1. The 350, inside the blue line. Here is the site that contains all the others. In 1985, a survey of the land inside these mountains logged more than 350 prehistoric sites, ancient places, documented, catalogued, real. Of those 350, only a handful have ever been dug by a professional. A handful. The rest sit exactly as they were, untouched, unopened, unexplained. Ask why, and you get the answer that started this whole thing. The chief archaeologist of the State Museum said the structures here were never seriously studied because nobody had ever produced evidence of anything but colonial origin. Read that again. Never studied because no evidence was produced. And no evidence was produced because nobody studied them. That is not science. That is a door held shut. 350 sites, stone chambers aimed at the solstice, boulders standing on their fingertips, caves with Ice Age hunters in them, a lake with a serpent in its oldest stories, a whole buried history that the experts decided, without looking, was nothing. They didn't explain these places, they refused to, and they are still out there tonight, in the cold under the pines. 350 of them. Quiet, aligned, waiting for the one morning a year the light comes in, before you go. Number 1 was the 350 sites nobody will dig. That's the one that stays with me. Not because of what's in them, because of how hard the people who should know have worked to not find out. The one that unsettles me most, though, is the chamber we opened with. A stone tunnel in the woods, built by no one anyone will name, aimed at a single sunrise. Somebody stood where that light lands and thought it was worth moving mountains for. Here is the grounding fact to take with you. These are not distant ruins across an ocean. They are in New York. You can drive to most of them. You can stoop and walk inside. So tell me 2 things down below. Which of these 13 would you actually spend the night at? And which one did we miss? Because you know these hills better than any map. And the next site on the list is probably in your own backyard.